We're now going to transition into another discussion about cost behavior. We just talked about variable cost. Now we're going to talk about fixed cost. A fixed cost, like the monthly cost of a basic telephone bill, for example, or for texting, whatever you wish, probably doesn't change for the basic activity. So for example, let's just say in where you are sitting is your manufacturing building, and the rent is $10,000 a square foot. Well, whether or not you make 10 units, 1,000 units, 10,000 units, or no units, you incur that cost one way or the other. It's not going to go away. So that fixed cost is represented on this slide as it doesn't change regardless of the volume. So a fixed cost is one that you gotta, we'll get into this a little bit more in a little bit, but keep this in mind. You gotta be careful with fixed costs because it's like going into Crate and Barrel. You drop it, you own it. Well, if you sign that lease for that $10,000 lease per month, you own it. You're gonna be paying that lease regardless of whether or not you produce one item or 10 items. Very, very important. Now this becomes particularly important when we look at the issue of fixed cost per unit. This slide and the corresponding graph represents how fixed costs per unit are reduced or decreased as you produce more. Because the more you produce, you're spreading that fixed cost across more units. Let me illustrate. Let's suppose this is quantity on the x-axis and cost on the y-axis. And I make 0 units, I could make 5,000 units, or I could make 10,000 units, up to 10,000. And let's just assume for the moment that the rent that I incur for my building to make product costs me $10,000 a month. Okay? If I build no units, I incur that $10,000 cost. Now, as I mentioned, fixed cost per unit is which this curve is attempting to recognize, fixed cost per unit. If I build one, I'm going to put what? $10,000 of cost into the cost of that product. But if I build 5,000 units and I spread that $10,000 cost across 5,000, if I divide $10,000 by 5,000 units, all of a sudden my cost comes down to $2 per unit. I've spread that cost across 5,000 units. And if I build all 10,000 a month, I bring it down to $1. This is a very important slide. This is a very important concept for you to understand. Some of you may have heard of this term before. EOS, economies of scale. It's a strategic management term that fundamentally says the more you make, the average cost of your product comes down. The more of your capacity you utilize, the lower your overall cost of a product. In this particular case, if I make 10,000, I drive my rent cost per unit down to $1. Anything less than that, the cost of my product, whatever it is, at least the rent component of it, is going to increase. This is a very, very, very important point. In a moment, we're going to get into the application of this so that you can see the power of fixed cost per unit and the implication that it has on your total cost of a product.